I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. And so then there's risk for children in being with other family and friends, but with peers as well. And not just of that sexual abuse or the harmful sexualized behavior, but also in exposure to pornography and that kind of thing,
Right.
which can happen a lot in, with unmonitored,
Unsupervised.
unsupervised group settings and that kind of thing. And
and we see it a lot in high school, especially in that first year. Year 6, year 7, I mean, they're learning about puberty and sex education in year 5, year 6 in school, which, and unfortunately, like the average age of first exposure to pornography is 8 to 10 now. So if you think about the fact that children are seeing pornography at 8 to 10, and then you've got them learning about puberty and sex ed around 10, 11, maybe it's not soon enough talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's probably a gap that parents can fill as well. You have talked about how one of the protective behaviours you can talk about with kids with is that feeling of unsafe.
Right.
What are some of the other things parents can teach their kids that are protective behaviours?
So secrets and surprises, or safe and unsafe secrets. So, talking to your kids about not keeping secrets, like we don't keep secrets in our family. And that can look like, so safe secrets are, there's a time limit. The child has control over it and none of their early warning signs are going off. So that's a safe secret. And they look like, what you buy your grandparents for a surprise birthday party or a surprise party, or what you're getting someone for Christmas, or, those little secrets that, or, someone's flying in from overseas and it's a surprise that they're coming to visit, and you know about it. Those things, there's a time limit, they've got control, and they've got no early warning signs, they're not feeling unsafe. Unsafe secrets are, they've got no control. There's no time limit. You've got to keep that secret forever, and someone's being harmed, or their early warning signs are going off. So teaching kids about safe and unsafe secrets, or secrets and surprises, means that a groomer or a predator can't use that against them. That is one of the biggest ways that child sex offenders control children, is that, they say, this is our little secret, or, they threaten them. If you tell anyone, you'll go to jail, or I'll go to jail, especially if it's someone they love in their family. A lot of people think that children must hate their abusers, but most of the time, because it's someone close to them and someone that they love, they don't hate them, they just want it to stop. So we need to give tools to our kids to understand that if someone does that, they need to come and talk to us. Some of the other things that we teach is about their safety network. So sadly, only 1 in 3 adults believe a child when they tell them that they've been harmed or sexually abused. So imagine that you're a little kid, or an 8 or 9-year-old, and you go to the person that you think is going to help you, and you say, something's happened, or you're trying to tell them that something's happened, and that person shuts you down, or doesn't listen, or, that child won't go to the next person or the next person, because that's usually where they stop. That's it. So what I do, try and teach kids is that they've got at least 5, can be more, but unfortunately a lot of kids can't even name 1 or 2 people that they feel safe with, because we get them to draw out their hand or a picture of, and label, or to choose 5 people, 5 adults. They need to be available to them, so they need to be contactable, easily contactable. They need to have previously listened to them, or like they show that they listen, and that and that they will automatically do something to keep them safe or help them, you know. So then they label off like they're 5 people. It could be a friend, a family, like an adult relative, mum or dad or auntie or uncle, you know, and then it could be a teacher at school, it could be the chaplain, it could be a psychologist, or it could be whoever they feel safe with. It's their choice, right? And so then I teach persistence, which is if the first person doesn't do something to stop what's happening or doesn't listen, you go on to the next one, and then the next one. And sadly, I have to teach kids that because history has shown us that, you know, 1 in 3, and that statistics only came out 18 months ago. Only 1 in 3 adults will believe a child when they tell them that they've been sexually abused or harmed. So because we're quite quick to, and in my experience, kids never lie about this stuff. Like there's been, you know, in thousands of cases that I've dealt with or interviews that I've done, you know, there would be the odd, like 1 in 100, maybe 99.99999% are telling the truth, and that 0.011% or whatever is someone that's, you know, there's a custody arrangement or a custody battle, and that parent has just sort of, you know, ask them to tell them something so that they can get away with something. And generally that's easy to identify because the child can't remember all the details. And then, you know, when you're in the interview, you can tell that there's some sort of coaching going on. So it's easy to pick out usually, you know, and in my experience, it doesn't, you know, children don't lie. They don't come to a police station and talk to a police officer because, you know, they want it to stop.
I think in that view too, it's reassuring to hear that from an interviewer's point of view, you can identify that when it's happening. But really, because of the big impact this has on kids and their development, it's better to just, you know,
err on the side of caution.
Yeah, exactly. Err on the side of caution and do something to help the child, because children have, like you mentioned in the beginning, so much less control in their lives than adults do. So if they are coming to us for help, it's really best to err on the side of caution and try and help them. And the truth will be uncovered.
And you know, I have parents contact me all the time and they're like, look, this is really strange behavior from this relative or this person, and you know, am I being overcautious, or you know, am I you know, imagining it? And I'm like, listen to your gut, like listen to your, like that's one of the things I would say to all parents is please listen to your intuition. Your intuition does not steer you wrong. It might not be apparent right then and there that your child or what's going on, but if you're looking at someone and thinking, that person's giving me vibes, or that doesn't seem right, you know, one of the things that I talk about in some of my stuff is safe and unsafe adults. You know, what does a safe adult do? They listen to children. They never single out one child over another. You know, that's because grooming is all about finding the vulnerable child that will let them do what they want them to do.
Right.
You know, and grooming happens to the adults and the victim. It happens to the parents and the victim. You know, when a child sex offender is, you know, targeting someone, they're going to target the child that isn't going to speak up, doesn't have a support network, and doesn't know what's going on most of the time. Or if that child is, you know, a bit older, maybe they've got no parents or no one to talk to. They're gonna abuse that privilege they have of being that child's confidant. They're going to want to be that child's, you know, favorite aunt or uncle or their favorite person. They're going to give them toys and surprises. They're going to want to spend one-on-one time with them. They're going to want to get them alone. They're going to touch them, you know, inappropriately and see what the child does, whether they tell a parent or not. And that's how they're picking their victim or their target to ensure that they can abuse them. You know, if the child doesn't know what's going on, it isn't confident, doesn't have a secure or safe adult to talk to, you know, doesn't pick up on the cues. Some of our children, especially those, you know, living with a disability or has a bit of neurodivergence, sometimes they won't pick up on those cues straight away. So we need to be watching out for that.
Yeah. And so you've talked a bit about the protective behaviours in terms of teaching kids, and what you're talking about now is that some of the red flags for what parents should look out for in adults.
Yeah. In my experience, it's pretty all much like these behaviours are all very similar. Like they don't. It's like almost like a script that they follow.
Right. Okay.
But it's the same, and it's pretty much similar in both in-person and online grooming. They find a vulnerable child, they isolate them from their support network. So they're going to become their confidant, their best friend, their special friend. And they're going to demonize their parents, demonize their support network, so that they think that this person, and especially imagine a vulnerable young child who doesn't know any better, or you've never ever shared that this is like, they love bomb them. So then they're thinking that this person is like the best thing ever, and they get them, they understand them, and then their parents don't get them, and they're I would imagine that, and I have seen that, there's a little bit of behavioural changes. All of a sudden, your child's not listening, they're pushing back, they're not telling you things anymore. And then, they're slowly desensitizing them to sexual behaviour. So in the case of in-person abuse, they'll touch them, they'll put their hand on them, they'll see if they will tolerate the touch. They might, and generally, like, there's some online stuff as well, because they'll share with them, they'll talk to them about, have they kissed anyone? Do they like any boys? Have they, or girls, do they have, have they ever, do they masturbate? Do they, have they ever do they have sex toys? Have they ever used a sex toy? They'll send them pictures of themselves, they'll send them nudes, they'll ask for nudes. That's in a way to get them desensitized to the idea of sex and have a sexual relationship. And then, eventually there comes a tipping point where they take action if the child hasn't already put any brakes in place, or a parent hasn't come in between that. And then once that tipping point happens and then the abuse starts, they will then, try and control the child. So there'll be threats and demands and you'll go to jail, or I'll go to jail, or, if you tell anyone, your parents won't believe you, they'll hate you, or I'll kill your parents, or whatever. And that's kind of how they control them from there. It doesn't always run in that same stages, but some of the red flags for me is a person who is behind closed doors with kids, like, why do we need to be behind closed doors with children? Someone who loves spending more time with kids than they spend time with adults. Right. We're the ones who love our kids. If we don't need to be with them 100% of the time, someone who wants to be with them all the time, then that's a red flag to me.
Yeah.
Special gifts, wanting to spend one-on-one time with them, wanting to, if you come home, or they're wanting to bathe them, or they're wanting to do things like, which means that they have to be semi-nude or nude, especially with little ones. They're all red flags for me.
I think that's really useful to think about, because in those, as you're talking about those situations, I feel like my gut instinct is coming up as well. And so I think really those things can, like, paying attention to your gut feeling about those things is, like you said, usually correct. But it's really interesting to hear from your point of view, because my experience has been working with children who are in the care of child safety, and they've usually been removed because there was abuse or neglect in some way. And so, much like you, moving then from focusing on helping those kids to the prevention, in my own parenting, I kind of take the approach that everybody's, I'm wary of everybody until you can prove otherwise, which is maybe a different stance. And
no, that's mine too.
Yeah, okay. I'm not alone.
No, and I think, I have been accused of having confirmation bias, but I don't think that's true, not with the amount of experience I've had. I think, if you're struggling with, so for instance, I get a lot of parents who contact me and they're struggling with grandparents and grandparents' boundaries. And the fact that, they're trying to be a protective parent, but the grandparents are like, well, what, you're just being silly. Don't be silly. Like, that's ridiculous. That's over the top. I give you permission to be as strict, as protective as possible. Like,
Okay. Awesome.
the amount of people on my social media who will say to me, I never understood why my parents never let me have a sleepover, but now I'm an adult, I get it.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
I never understood why my parents wouldn't let me go to such and such's house, or this uncle's house, or this grandparent's house, or, but now I get it. Like, and because as children, of course, we want to do all the things. Of course, we want to be where all the action's at. We got FOMO, for goodness sakes. Like, kids are built-in FOMO, right? And, and so we're not going to be the coolest parents if we're saying no to stuff.
Yeah.
But we're going to have kids that are going to grow up with a normal relationship and a normal lifestyle. And we're going to, and I think some of the language I use is that those behaviors are inappropriate. I use inappropriate and appropriate. So when I'm talking to someone and they're like going, well, how do I talk to my parents? Because I don't think it's appropriate, or I don't think it's normal for my for the child's grandfather to want to bathe the kids at, 2 and 1. And I'm like, well, just use inappropriate. It's inappropriate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's inappropriate for you to be bathing my children. It's my job. I'm their parent.
Yeah.
It's inappropriate for, and like use the language like sleepovers is a big one. There's a big push. It's kind of like there's a bit of a split between one camp and the other. Some people don't believe in sleepovers, and then there's the push for sleepovers. Use the language of, we don't do sleepovers in our family.
Yeah. Yep. And in my experience too, I've found that that's generally been pretty well respected, and people often will say things like, does your family do sleepovers, or does
it's becoming more normalized.
Yeah, and asking about the ages as well. And something I talk to parents about, and in my own experience have put in place too, is that sometimes it's not necessarily about the other people having, for example, in the sleepover, it might be about my child and how the skills they have. And if I don't feel confident that my child will talk to me about the things that have happened, then I won't put them in that situation. But once they've developed that skill where I know I can ask them what happened and they can explain it to me, then it's a different way up of risk.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. Like, if my daughter if I didn't believe my daughter had the skills or the knowledge or the wisdom or the tools to be able to handle a situation, I wasn't putting her in that situation. It's based on the child, and you can have one child who's super mature and one child who's super immature and one child who's development, delayed, whatever. So you don't want to put, each child is an individual. And I think one of the things I teach in my book, and one of the things I talk about, is when I was a police officer, I did scenario training. So I used to, I would be like practicing for high risk vehicle stops, or I'd be practicing for closed quarter room clearing with my gun out. We would be practicing for, active shooter scenarios. I never had to do any of those things in my whole 10 years, but yeah, I practiced them every year, right? And so one of the things I did with my daughter was I just did scenarios with her, but I did it in a way that was usually, and I had the language because I'd spoken to hundreds and hundreds of children. I'd just be like, what do you think kids could do if they were at the shops and they couldn't find their mum?
Yeah.
What do you think kids could do if, so I never when she was little, I never made it about her.
Yeah.
I made it about kids, just kids in general. So then we're not putting fear into them. We're just talking about how kids can help themselves. And generally so we're going through scenarios like, what could kids do if, or what could a kid do if they're at the park and a stranger comes up and asks them to come with them? Focusing on the behavior of what they could do to get out of it, not focusing on well, there's strangers in the world and they could come and get you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
I do.
and then, you know, when she got a bit older, I'd be like, what has any of your friends, so I'm talking 9, 8, 9, 10, what have any of your friends ever been asked for pictures of them in their pictures of their privates? Or have any of your friends ever been asked to send feet pics? Because that was a big thing back in the day, about 5, 6 years ago, that feet pics, you know, people sent online predators used to ask for feet pics to see if a kid was complicit to sending more pictures.
Right. Okay.
So that's, you know, have any of your friends been asked to send feet pics? And then and my daughter would be like, oh, I don't know, but my friend has been asked to send a picture of their, you know, privates, and then, you know, we're able to have a further discussion about it. I'm like, okay, what would you do if you were sent a pic? You know, what could you do if you were asked to send a new picture? What would you do next? Like, what do you think is the next thing that you could do to get help? You know, like, and just giving them an opportunity to think those scenarios through, because whilst we're doing that, first of all, we're talking about the issue. Second of all, we're giving them confidence to know that they can come to us. Third of all, we're giving them options that we've helped them develop. So then if they are ever in that scenario, they know exactly what to do next.
Yeah. Yep.
We're not leaving them open.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I often use the example for parents too, because they're not sure how much to say or not to say. And I think kids will ask questions if they've got questions. So if you start these conversations at the level you think your kids are at, they'll ask if they want to know more, and then you can tell them more.
Yeah, I agree. And like I used to always, so I would start off with what could kids do if, or what would you do, or what could you do? Because then I could understand where she was at, like my daughter or the child I was talking to. Then I could understand what knowledge they had. You know, have you ever heard of, like, oh, you know, I was listening to the radio the other day and there was this story on the radio about this little girl who, you know, a stranger came and asked them to talk to them. A stranger talked to them in the park. What do you think kids could do if that happened? Or what would you do if that happened? Or, you know, you can use anything to be able to give them. And it's all teachable moments, right? You're in the car and you hear something on the radio about something and you go, oh, well, what do you think kids could do in that situation? What would you have done in that situation?
Yep. It sounds like your your daughters probably go through a lot of what my kids go through too. I'm sure they roll their eyes because I was like, what would you be thinking in that situation? And what feelings do you think you would have? That's
probably you go into the feelings thing. I'm just like, what could you do? Like, I'm thinking, how do you get out of it? Like, and you know, situations like in movies where, you know, and she was only about 11 or something like that at the time, and we were watching a movie where there was a girl who maybe 12, and there was a girl in the movie that it was implied, it wasn't a scene in the movie, but she got really drunk, had used some drugs, and she was sexually assaulted in the movie. And some people were like, you watching a movie like that with your 12-year-old? I'm like, yes, I watched. You know, unfortunately, in the job I had, I used to come home sometimes and I'd be really traumatized by what I'd seen and heard. And, you know, my daughter has probably a little bit more knowledge about how bad the world can be. I don't actually think it's a bad thing. She's actually very well adjusted and very easily, she's, you know, we've gone through scenarios. But anyway, there was this movie and I just said to her, why do you think she might have, like, and she's a character, right? She's not a real person, but I'm like, why do you think people sometimes do that stuff? Like, why do they do that? You know, how do you think it was safe to do drugs and alcohol? Because, you know, and like we just talked about the scenario and we're just like, well, you know, when you do that stuff, you kind of don't have control over yourself anymore. And you know, unfortunately, they didn't have the right to do that. And we talked about consent and we talked about, you know, how you can't give consent when you're intoxicated and, you know, all of these things, you know, and it just doesn't have, it doesn't have to be a stilted conversation where you're awkward and uncomfortable. It can be about anything. And I think kids appreciate it if you just have those conversations conversationally. Instead of in like, right, well, we've got to have the birds and bees talk and we need to talk about consent, you know, because consent consent education is coming into schools, but, you know, as parents, it's our job to teach them consent from very young, you know. And funny story about consent is that my daughter, when she was taught about stop it, I don't like it in daycare.
Okay.
So that was her early consent education when she was about 2.5. And so she used to, if someone did something and she didn't like it, she'd be stop it, I don't like it, and hand up, like hand signal. And I loved it, right? But, you know, she used to do it to her grandfather when he was trying to tickle her and all of this stuff. And then eventually I gave her she had the language, and she used to say, I don't give consent.
Right,
so stop
love
it,
that.
give consent. And so, you know, so you go to tickle her, or you like, she hates it when I pick her, like, she always has pimples, and I'm one of those horrendous parents who like, oh, pimple.
Yep.
She's like, stop, I don't give you consent to pick my pimples. And of course, you know, if someone says no, stop, I don't give consent, we have to respect their boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important thing as well, giving them the language to be able to draw a boundary, and then also respecting that boundary so that they learn that's what people should do.
It doesn't just help with preventing child sexual abuse. It helps in relationships. It helps in workplaces. It helps in schoolyards. It helps in peer pressure. You know, when I was researching my book and thinking about consent, one of the things that I realised is that unless we give permission to our own kids to say no to things and respect that no, then they're never going to expect or respect no.
Yeah, yep. That's right.
You know, and it's not just about sex and you know, sexual activity. It's about everything. It's about posting photos online or taking photos of people, or it's about, you know, whether they eat someone's food or touch someone that doesn't want, you know, or, you know, all of the things. So it's not just, consent isn't just about sex, it's about everything. And if we don't model it to our kids, then they're going to struggle with it, and it could get them in strife in adulthood.
Definitely. I feel like our conversations kind of come full circle back from where right at the beginning we were talking about giving kids choice over their circumstances. And so that's probably a really great place to wrap up the conversation. But you have mentioned your book a couple of times. It's actually in my bookshelf behind me here, but I haven't read it yet, I've got to confess.
Okay.
But I would love to. Is it designed with parents in mind?
Yes. Parents and caregivers. So it's called Operation Kids Safe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention.
Here it is.
And it's parents and caregivers. And it basically goes through everything I've just talked about and more. But in every section, there's like usable tools, topics you can talk about, how to talk to them, how to have those conversations, what's important to talk about, you know. And, you know, not tooting my own horn, but it basically eases that stress of what to talk about and when to talk about and how to talk about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely. No, I think that's right. I love in there that there's tips like things like what grooming looks like, which is similar to what we talked about today, but then also step-by-step guides of, you know, what to do if your child does this, and so, because those are the stressful moments. If your child's telling you something, you can panic, but having a bit of a guide to go through is great. I know that you've mentioned another book as well called Tricky People. I think I heard about that somewhere. I don't know if you're aware of that one.
Yeah, it is. It's a Queensland person. I actually want to get her on my podcast. But so tricky behaviours is what I was talking about. But there is a book called Tricky People, and it's basically a smaller kids book, like a pre-tween book that talks about tricky behaviours, and it talks about, you know, if someone does something that's tricky, you know, those are those things where they're tricking you into something, then it's another more for smaller kids about how to identify those, and that we can go to a safe person and talk. It's another book around protective behaviours, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. So I think both of those are really great suggestions for parents to have a really good place to start. So I'll put a link to those things, and especially your book down there, and I will now read it. It was my my intention to read it before we had our conversation, but
that's okay.
Life.
If you're anything like me, you've got like a to be read pile as long as your arm. So there's always books to read.
Yep, that's right. But also with this one, I think it's a handy thing that you could just, you can pick out the bits that are relevant for the stage for your kids as well.
Exactly what my intention was. I didn't want it to, I mean, some people sit down, it's about a 6-hour read from start to finish, but and it's on Audible as well, so you don't have to just read it. It's on audio as well. I went
brilliant.
a year ago. But you know, it's one of those books where you pick it up and where you're at, you can, you know, you think that, okay, now's the time to talk about pornography. There's a section on pornography. Now's the time to talk about sex. There's a section on sex and sexting, you know. There's all sections, and in the back of the book is the what to do if section, like what to do if your child comes and discloses something to you. It could be cyberbullying, it could be online grooming, it could be anything, but you know what to do. Because one of the things I noticed or have identified since leaving is parents, adults don't realise how they have rights when it comes to this stuff. They have the right to ask questions of police and know that, you know, what's happening when they report something. They don't just have to sit idly and wait.
Brilliant. That's so helpful. Thank you so much for talking today. I think our conversation will be really helpful for lots of parents out there, and it's been helpful for me as well to reevaluate some of the things that I do as a parent and the little gaps that I've probably left, and now I've got some ideas about how to fill in those educational gaps for my kids. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And it kind of went all over the place, but it all came back into a nice little ball.
That's right. Like a ball of wool, it's kind of all in the middle, but it's turned out neatly. So thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Tran Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.